Today's guest has devoted his career to uncovering the truth behind violent crime. Justin Bocock is a retired homicide detective who served as lead investigator in more than 100 homicide, cold case, and suspicious death investigations. Before joining the Mesa Police Department in Arizona, he began his career as a uniformed division officer in the U.S. Secret Service. Over his 20 years with Mesa PD, Justin worked patrol, trained new officers, and became a specialist in complex casework and crime scene investigation. In 2019, he was named Homicide Detective of the Year by the Arizona Homicide Investigators Association for pioneering drone technology at crime scenes. After retiring, he contributed as a subject matter expert for criminal justice textbooks, developing realistic investigative scenarios used in higher education. And in September of 2025, he released his debut true crime book, On Call: Case Files from a Career in Homicide, featuring 13 real cases he personally investigated. Today, he's here to share what really happens behind the tape, how cases are solved, and what readers can learn by seeing investigations through the eyes of a detective. Please welcome Justin Bocock. How's it going, Justin?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing amazing, man.
Good.
So let's dive into a little bit of your background, man. What brought you to the law enforcement career?
You know, it just kind of came upon it. I turned 18, I joined the Air Force, and I was an aircraft mechanic on C-141B. They're these really big cargo airplanes. And I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey. And part of our mission was transporting the limousines and the transport vehicles for presidential movements. And that's how I found out about the Secret Service Uniform Division. So after I did 4 years in the Air Force, I got out, I actually moved to Seattle first, where I was working for, I was doing heavy maintenance on large airplanes, 727-200s. And 4:00 in the morning, I got a call from the Secret Service Uniform Division. And they said, the academy starts in 2 weeks. We need a yes or no right now. If you say no, we're going to next on list. So we need a yes or no. And I said, yes. And 2 weeks later, I was in Washington, D.C. so I just kind of happened into law enforcement. And then I was in the Secret Service Uniform Division for about a year and a half. Uniform Division, they kind of like, everybody thinks of agents. Well, the agents protect the people, and Uniform Division protects the property, like the homes and the motorcade and all that. I was assigned to the Naval Observatory, where the Vice President lives. And at that time, it was Al Gore. Loved the job. It was great, amazing training. It was really kind of boring. A lot of sitting around, and I don't do sitting around real well. And then one day I was at the White House, and there was a guy from Mesa, Arizona Police Department, and he was outside the White House gates, and he was like, "Hey, we're hiring. You know, we're always looking to hire people, and you should check it out. It's a smaller city that's growing and has a lot of potential." So I applied, and then in 2001. I ended up coming to Mesa, Arizona, where I ended up doing 20 years there. So that's kind of how I got into law enforcement. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. I mean, that would be an unusual call you get at 4:00 in the morning. Somebody calling from the Secret Service.
Yes.
I could also imagine once you, started working for the local police department there in Mesa, some of the other officers were probably kind of intimidated, wondering why somebody from the Secret Service is working local law enforcement. Did you kind of get that reaction from a lot of people?
I get it all the time.
Yeah.
Because usually it's the opposite way. Usually people start local and then they go federal. And I always said that I didn't really plan on getting into law enforcement. It's just something that I kind of fell into. Mm-hmm. But as Uniform Division, part of our training was there's two parts of the training. The first part was we go down to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, where we learn to become federal police officers. And we basically learn how to handle domestic violence calls, do traffic stops, basic law enforcement stuff. I really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. It was running and jumping and pulling your gun out and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then after you graduate that, you go back to the Secret Service Beltsville, Maryland Academy, where you learn protection, which is fun and exciting, but it's also very boring because you're waiting for that big thing to happen that you hope never actually happens. So that's how I always explained it. And I also always say, year and a half in the uniform division, I pulled my gun out of my holster twice, not in training, but in real life scenarios. My first day on the street after I graduated the academy and I was a active police officer, I had already pulled my gun out about 4 times on my first shift, because that's just what local law enforcement does. Local law enforcement is way more high paced, way more fast paced and kind of action oriented. So that's how I always explained it. It was great training, and I learned so much, and it made me a better police officer in the long run. It was just boring. It was a lot of sitting around and waiting, and I would rather be more proactive and go out there and actively participate.
Yeah, I completely get that. I worked as a mechanic as well, spent 20 years in the Army, and being active and being outside in different environments, I love that. And as I grew in rank, the longer at a desk became more prevalent, and I found myself more tired from the days of sitting around than I did if I was out there working on the floor all day long. And it was a weird experience for me, but I completely understand it. It's just doing nothing but mentally thinking and typing is not my enjoyment.
Yes. So you completely understand.
I completely get it. So you into the police department there, and now you've already discovered it's a lot more action based, proactive versus reactive. Kind of give me an idea of what was your average day like there?
So at that time, in 2001, Mesa, Arizona was a population of about 450,000. So it was a mid-sized city, and it's just outside of Phoenix. If you've ever heard of Phoenix, Arizona, it's the capital. It's a big city. And then right next to it is Tempe, where the Arizona State University is. And then Mesa is just outside of that. So we're like the third city outside of Phoenix, or out of Phoenix. I worked the central area. And I always worked swing shift or graveyard shift. So 2 p.m. to or 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. I liked working nights. I liked working central because and my beats were kind of a mixture. But to just be straight honest, we had a lot of gang and prostitute activity in the areas that I worked. And that's the areas that I liked working. I could always, if I needed on views, or if I wanted to get proactive, or I had information from people on the street saying, hey, there's a lot of activity, in this area, or, my kid's bike was stolen, that kind of thing. I kind of knew where to go. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to this area and we're going to kind of do some directed patrol over in that area. And I could drive around and you could spot a drunk driver or, somebody driving without any lights on. Sometimes one time graveyard shift, just a guy with a shotgun walking across the street. Like, okay, I mean, it's not illegal, but I can at least stop and talk to you. Hey, where are you going at midnight with a shotgun? You know what I mean? Like that's, I think that's worth checking into. So that was kind of the basic thing, is that as a patrol officer, your main function is always to answer the calls for service. We all see on the radio where they get a radio call of, hey, this person called 911, and you got to go there. And that's your primary function. But when you're not doing that, all the officers, you always kind of know your beat. You have a good working relationship with the community, and you know the areas that you need to focus on, and you kind of just go and hang out in those areas and try to see if you can catch some activity going on, or if not, maybe just even deter it. Because sometimes just driving down the streets and they see a black and white police car, nobody does anything. And they're like, well, we're just going to not do anything now. We're going to go home. So you kind of already deterred crime just by driving around sometimes.
Yeah, I absolutely. That's the key right there, is being in the community and letting the people that are not there to do crime understand that there is people there that want to help, and that you're not just avoiding them, as well as the people that do want to do crime, like you said, deterring because of the frequency that they're seeing police action. So they have to move elsewhere or find a different method. Anything that disrupts that pattern is going to make it more likely that they're going to get caught and make a mistake. Yeah. So as how long was you at the Mesa? You stayed there throughout retirement, correct?
Yes, for 20 years. And I always knew that I would leave. So, and I'm still a young person, but I say I'm retired, but I'm really not retired. I was just able to get my pension after 20 years. You're allowed to get your pension and then move on and do your second career or do your third career. Even in the academy, I was always like, I'm going to do 20 years here and I'm going to go do something else. I don't know what yet, but there's a lot of jobs out there that I would like to do, and I'm going to try to do as many of them. So I always had that idea that I was only going to do 20. And then move on, like I said, and do my other career, because there's a lot of things I still want to do.
So as you moved up, I assume you went through the ranks and eventually became a detective.
Correct. Yeah. I did about 6 years in patrol. And then about 3 of that was also a field training officer. So I trained the new officers that came out. And then I really started getting into the investigative side of it. When I had a chance, when I wasn't answering calls for service, doing more investigation into crimes and looking into them myself without stepping on the toes of a detective, but starting to get deeper into it because you want to increase your investigative skills. And then in 2007, I tested for detectives. I got it. And when I went to detectives, I was the nighttime beer run detective. So I did beer runs, and that's where everybody starts. Everybody starts in beer runs. And it's somebody steals beer and then it's caught on video, and you look at that video, you look at photos, and you make a photo lineup if you think somebody looks like it. And then you go and you show that photo lineup to the clerk on duty and see if they pick somebody out. And if they do, you go contact them and give them a ticket. And like, hey, I got you on video, yesterday stealing some beer from this place. And most 90% of the time, yeah, you got me. Like, all right, and write him a ticket. Here's a ticket. You got to go to court. It's a misdemeanor. You can't do that. And that's where you start. That's where you start. So that's the glamorous world of detecting.
Man, that is that's a long ways away from when I was growing up. It used to be you just stood outside and wait and ask people to buy for you until you finally found the one guy that would. Now they're just running in, grabbing the beer and running out. And it's happening so frequently, they had to create a position to just handle that thing.
And it wasn't just a position. It was a great learning tool, because those are great cases to learn on, because you're learning how to capture video. You're learning how to review video. You're learning how to make photo lineups. You're learning how to identify or talk to the clerks, get as much information as you possibly could. Sometimes I'd even have the clerks make composite sketches and then have that compared to photos using like photo recognition technology and facial recognition technology. So it teaches you as a young detective to start at the basics and start building up, because those features that you learn as a beer run detective, you're going to learn later. I use those as a homicide detective, where now I was doing the exact same thing, where I was getting video and I was doing composite sketches, making photo lineups, using facial recognition. Only it was no longer going to knock on a door and give you a ticket. It was the SWAT team was knocking on your door and taking you to jail for murder. So it's kind of a good stepping stool, and that you have to learn the basics and then move up from there. So
I'm assuming too, as you moved up into detective, your amount of action slows down, because now it's more of you're on the chess side and trying to figure out their moves and who they are and all that type of stuff. And like you just said, once it's time to actually apprehend, it's SWAT or somebody else that's going in and doing that work. How did that sit with you being so action oriented?
It was a good time. Well, I did it at a time when I was ready for it. And I always tell people, don't go to a desk job if you're not ready for it. Because there are some people who went to detective and then they hear things on the radio. There's a foot pursuit or a vehicle pursuit. And they're like, oh, grabbing their stuff. I'm going to go. No, that's not your job anymore. After my 6 years in patrol, I was kind of done. I wasn't done with it, but I was ready to move on to the next step. Because you're right. When you're a patrol officer, when you run after somebody and then you get them in handcuffs, that's when you get that, like, I did something good, right? Like I'm a winner and I did something right. You know what I mean? When you're a detective, that's not it anymore. The detective world is when you identify that person, and where you have no suspect at all, and you do all this work, and all of a sudden it comes together and you're like, oh no, I just identified the suspect. And then that's the high five. They're like, yeah, I am awesome. You know what I mean? And then as you get more in detective world, into the homicide world, it's not always about arresting them. It's also about the prosecution. So you get even further where it's not, we always said that professional detectives don't put people in handcuffs. Professional detectives put people in prison. So then it gets to the point later on in your career where now you're really focusing on the basics that you've already had, but now you're really focusing on the court side of it. And we don't have a say in it, but we can help with that a lot. So when you get a case where, the guy gets, or the suspect gets, life in prison or 100 years plus 20, you're like, yeah, I did something good. You know what I mean? So you're really stepping up your game, each level of the game. Yeah. But it all starts with the basics. You got to start the basics as a patrol officer, doing it to get to where you, the end game.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense, especially, just something as simple as forgetting to read Miranda rights or something. Yeah. And it's all basic stuff, but sometimes you get caught up in excitement or whatever, and something goes wrong, but then that just throws the whole case out and everything else was for nothing. Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I've always often wondered this, and it's probably not the most exciting question that the listeners are going to love, but how do you guys multitask with so many cases? Because I know you're not just working one homicide or one case at a time. How do you compartmentalize with so many different cases? There's still only X number of hours in your shift.
And again, that starts with that is a skill, and it's something that is learned as a patrol officer. Because as a patrol officer, we had things that we carry in our pocket called a field interview card. Mm-hmm. And it was basically, if I stopped somebody, it was just your name, your date of birth, what's your address, what's your driver's license number, all that kind of stuff. Well, after a while, you learn as a patrol officer that you start talking to people and you remember people's faces, you remember people's names. And then you come across somebody and say, hey, what's your name? And they tell you, and you go, you know what? You're not. Because I talked to you and you pull out your field interview cards and you'd save them all and you'd flip through and go, I talked to you 2 weeks ago and you told me your name was John. Oh yeah, I lied because I got warrants. Like, okay. So it starts there, and you really start knowing it. And as a patrol officer, you have to constantly do that. You're constantly keeping people's names, faces, activities. You drive down the street and you recognize that guy. Like, hey, he was wearing that shirt 2 weeks ago when I saw him. I remember that guy, and he went into the store and he came out and was acting kind of weird. I'm just going to follow him, see what's going on. You know what I'm saying? So you learn, again, stepping stones. You learn that as a patrol officer. And then when you start doing detective world, like I started in beer runs, and then I went to commercial burglaries, residential burglaries, same thing. You recognize the cases and you just get good. You kind of get accustomed to just remembering a lot of names and addresses. Where an address comes up, you go, oh, that address, 120 North Robeson, which is the police headquarters. But 120 North Robeson. Oh, they had a residential burglary there 6 months ago. Let me look that one up. And you just start remembering it, so that by the time you get into the homicide world, you already have that. So, and also the robberies, you had a higher caseload than homicide, obviously, because there's not as many homicides as robberies. Yeah. But in those, you learn, it's just a learned pattern of remembering things. And if you ever talk to cops, that's why cops have amazing stories, because they never forget anything. They always remember. They're like, I don't remember the guy's last name, but I remember his name was John, and he was wearing a green shirt and he spit on me. And then we ran and it was great. And we got into a fist fight, and then I got him in handcuffs, and then it was all over. And because you just remember all this, that's just part of the job. That's just part of the job.
Yeah. In my world, right now I struggle to remember if I took my meds in the morning. So I don't think that part I would
also
succeeded.
Why policing is a young man's game. It really is. Being a patrol officer is a young man's game. And I still keep in shape. I still run and all that kind of stuff. But if I got into a foot pursuit now, I would probably pull something getting out of the car. Yeah. Patrol officer is for the young guys. And even in the detective world, you're not doing a lot of the strenuous stuff, but like you were saying, you're doing the mental stuff and hours on end. I mean, there was times, the most I've ever stayed up consecutively in a row was 46 hours in a row. And you're mentally fried. And I could not do that now. That I can't. I get, 8 to 10 hours sleep every day. I get naps. Yeah, I could not do that again. Again, it's a young man's game.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that too. I left out of the special ops community for that exact reason. I just, getting close to retirement, I couldn't run with those 19, 20-year-old kids anymore. And it was tough, and it sucked because, when I went in the military, I wanted to become a Ranger, and I had that opportunity to go work in a Ranger battalion. But man, I was already 35, 36 years old. I wasn't about to go to Ranger school at 35 or 36 years old. And it was just tough, but it makes perfect sense. By that time I was already doing mostly administrative. And so that same thing happened. And it's just compiled from there as I gotten older. Yep. But that makes perfect sense. So I guess your day then would be split up between these cases, right? So you're basically doing investigations as information comes up. And so on X day, if we found out information about X case, that's the case we're going to go and interview or follow up on that lead and so forth. And I assume there's a starting point for every situation. When you first go on scene, the first thing you're going to do is, secure the scene, then talk to witnesses, and then start building your initial suspect list, which is usually consists of friends and family, and so forth, Yeah. And then once you've worked through those, at that point, then it becomes more about following up on leads. Am I semi close?
Yeah, you're really close. Exactly. So when the murder first happens, that's when they always say the first 48, it really is the busy part, because you're doing all the initial investigation. You're doing victimology. You're looking into the victims. You're doing the crime scene investigation. So you're writing search warrant to search the home or the residence or the business, wherever it happened. You're collecting all the evidence that you possibly can. And then you're getting that evidence to the crime lab. So that's kind of your first priority, because we live in a forensic world. Yeah. So you get as much evidence as you possibly can, and then you get that to the crime lab, and then you get them briefed up and let them. I would always meet them in person, make a PowerPoint, show them crime scene photos, get their buy-in, get them to really be like, wow, yeah, we can solve this. We can, like, oh, you found a bloody glove? Yeah. We can get blood and we can solve this thing. So once you get that going, that takes time, because they're going to need about a week to do the processing there. Then you also have the biggest thing with the modern day complex investigations and homicide investigations is technology. You have phones, laptops, cars, infotainment centers on cars hold huge amounts of information. So now you have to get search warrants to write all those. So that's a priority as well. So you kind of prioritize it. You write all these search warrants to Google and Verizon and Altel. You get them all off. It's not like the movies where you write a search warrant, get it approved by a judge, and then you send it off to Verizon, and then they send it back to you right away. It's even, they'll do that, but they're going to say, we'll do it for you, but we're going to charge you a fortune for it. And sometimes the departments will pay for it, and sometimes they won't. It all depends on you. You have to kind of go to your bosses and be like, hey, we really need to pay it for this. And even if you do pay a really high price, it still could take a week to get to it, because they have to compile all that data. We're talking, I've seen 10,000 pages of phone data, because people are just sending pictures and texts and all kinds of things. So you get all those search warrants sent off, and then you kind of take a breath, because you're like, okay, now you got to wait for all that stuff to come in. And then while that's going on, that's when you have time to work on your other homicides, where you're like, okay, you check your emails. I got my call detail records from the previous homicide just came in. Let me start working on those. And then you kind of work that until your other stuff comes in or the next homicide happens. And then you're like, your boss will come in and say, drop everything. We got a homicide happening. It's all hands on deck. Let's go. And you kind of drop everything. So Mesa, we were very lucky. We only got about 20 to 30 murders a year, and we had 10 people in the unit. So it was a manageable unit. Yeah. But like Phoenix, they get hundreds of homicides a year, and they only have like 30 detectives. So they always say they work a homicide until a new homicide happens. And if they don't solve it before the next one happens, they just kind of keep going unless something else happens. That's why they have a huge cold case file that happened. Yeah. But Mesa, we were very lucky in that instance, is that we were able to keep up with it. But it was a constant ebb and flow. It was a constant, like, you'd sit down and you're kind of doing admin stuff, and then it'd be like, oh, stop everything. We have a murder. All right. And then you were out of the office for 2 days doing the crime scene, collecting the evidence again, getting the evidence to the crime lab, getting that process started, getting back in the office, writing the search warrants. And they're like, okay, now I'm going to sit and work on my other homicide. Oh, yep, another one just happened, or they need Gilbert, another agency needs help with something, or something comes up. So yeah, it's a huge balancing act, and you always feel like you're behind the curve, and you're always just struggling to keep your head above water. But most detectives do as best they can. They really do.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense because I always get fascinated with the behind the scenes stuff. I'm kind of a weird guy like that. I like to know what makes things tick. And I know that, your user interface, what you're seeing up front is not the nuts and the bolts. It's what's happening behind the scenes. Like you just said, technology and your crime labs and everything else. And, I know probably some of my listeners is now out there picturing NCIS and Bones working cases, but, there's a protocol to everything. You guys are not that far away from the military as far as the way things work and act. So which department did you find the most fascinating when you were working as a detective?
What do you mean? Which department?
As far like working homicides or working robberies or chasing down a 15-year-old with beer.
I would say, I would honestly say robberies. Homicides are basically homicide. Very few times is a murder or just a murder.
Yeah.
A murder is usually something, another crime was committed and then a murder happened. You know what I'm saying? Like a robbery and then a murder, or a burglary and then a murder. I always found robbery interesting. And that's what got me into the violent crimes world, is when I started doing robberies. And about 2 years into doing robberies, I interviewed one suspect, and it was like his third or fourth. I was doing serial robbery at the time. And this is like his third or fourth robbery. And this is back in the day when people were robbing, when they used to have Percocet 30s, or they call them Perk 30s.
Yep.
And they were robbing pharmacies galore for those. They wanted those. They don't make them anymore because it was a non-time release thing. So it was really good for, I guess, a high. And everybody wanted the Perk 30s. It was like his third or fourth one. And I remember just asking him, like, why do you keep doing this? And he was very honest with me. And was like, man, once you commit a robbery, he goes, that adrenaline rush, he goes, you got to do it again. He goes, I committed my first one, went to jail for 6 months. And he goes, all I thought about was doing it again. He goes, I got out and I did it. Same thing. Went to jail. I planned the next one. He goes, it's just a high. And he goes, once you get into it, there's no other high in this world that is as good as going into a place and robbing them and taking their stuff from them. He goes, there's nothing that beats that. He's like, drugs, sex, nothing beats that. And that always intrigued me in the robbery world. So I always kept that in the back of the mind when I would look at robberies, as these are people who either it's not their first time, or this is their first time, and it's going to lead them down that road of always doing it again. So I always found robberies really interesting that way, because you could really start looking at it and linking people together, and then different people would rob different things, but they somehow end up always getting together, because people with like minds are always kind of finding themselves, and then they do things together, and you're like, well, wait a minute. Their fingerprints are here on this one and this one separately, but then they're on this one together. Are they a crew, or are they just, and you finally catch them and talk to them. And it's, oh no, we just met in a bar, started talking about robberies. And we're like, hey, want to go do one? Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, it just happens like that. It's so weird how it happens, but it's an interesting world. The robbery world is very, very interesting.
Yeah. I think the underworld, that's very true. Because I found, back when in my younger days when I was playing online poker, before the whole Poker Stars and everything. And I found it was easier to trust people that I had never met in my life in that community than I would say somebody that I just had a conversation with. And, I always found it fascinating how, like, the occupation, the interest kept people honest. I.e., two guys getting ready to go rob a bar or rob a place that they just met 10 minutes ago. And then, they succeed, they split everything, they high five, and they walk off instead of trying to rob each other now, Yeah. And it is kind of fascinating with that mindset, how like-minded people will be honest to other like-minded people.
Yep.
So what was some of the cases in robbery that really that you really struggled with, that was just absolutely tough to figure out?
Some of the random ones. Back when I was in robbery, so I was in robbery from about 2008 to about 2012. 2012 is when I went to Homicide. And we had a lot of, at that time, I'm in Mesa, Arizona, is about 2 hours north of the Mexican border. So we would get a lot of day workers that would come up here, and they would get robbed by other people. And a lot of times they were being robbed by people from Mexico. So it was really hard because the victims didn't really trust us and weren't giving us information, but also they didn't have much information. They were like, he was a Mexican guy that had brown ostrich skin boots on and a big belt buckle. And you know what I mean?
That narrowed it down.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, that doesn't do me any good. So they really didn't know, but they also they didn't trust us. They didn't know. And even if they did know who it was, they weren't going to say anything, because sometimes as you investigate, you found out it was because the victims were also involved in criminal activity. And that was the only part that was always hard. And as a detective and a police officer, you have to get used to, is that you have to look at other people's biases, other people's interests. Everybody's lying about something. Yep. Sometimes they're just not lying about the crime you're talking about. Like, I've had people where I'm talking to them and you just get a sense that they're lying. Like, you just kind of tell, like, you're asking them, like, well, where'd you go? Well, oh, I was just walking down the street stargazing. Okay, you're not walking down the street. And they come to find out they're lying because they were having an affair, not because they committed a robbery or they committed a murder, but they were having an extramarital affair that they didn't want anybody to find out about. Right. And then when you confront them, like, look, I found out you're having an affair. Why don't you just say that? Because I don't want that to come out in a police report. You know what I mean? Like, well, if you would have told me that, you wouldn't have been a suspect for murder for the last 2 months. You know what I mean? So somebody's always lying about something. And everybody has, not everybody, most people have like stuff that they do that they don't really want to tell the police what they're doing. It's just one of those things, whether it's illegal, not illegal, or you just don't want to tell the police. Like, police show up at my door, can I come in? No. You have a warrant? Like, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I just don't want you in my home. So that's the same thing, where you always have to look at what their motivation is. So that was always hard, because you always have to look, and you have to look at the evidence and try to keep non-biased, try to keep logic involved, and still try to use your gut senses and be like, hey, are they lying to me about this? Are they lying to me about the robbery? Do I keep looking at them? Do I look at somebody else? And that's the real struggle with like working violent crimes, because it's just, a lot of times it's a huge web of crazy, and you're just trying to figure out if it is actually your crime or another crime. So
would you say a lot of the violent crimes were more opportunity or spontaneous? Maybe like you said, the robbery was planned, but something went wrong, and then spontaneously they either hurt somebody or killed somebody in that act, like you said. Is that probably the most common? It's not necessarily somebody just intended on going out there and committing a violent crime.
Absolutely. Even in the robbery world, even in just regular violent crime, like aggravated assaults, just like shooting somebody or beating somebody up, it's almost always just a spur of the moment thing. It just kind of happened. There's usually alcohol and drugs involved. Very, very few times do people commit robberies and murders completely sober, because it's a stressful thing. It's a stressful thing to do. Even people who plan on doing a robbery, very few people I found planned them months and months in advance. I mean, the planning maybe had been a couple of hours, maybe a day. Like, hey, I heard about this guy who's got weed. Let's go rip him off. And then the next day, you and your buddies go and you rip him off. Like, that's the extent of the planning. But it wasn't like pre-surveillance. All the stuff you see in the movies, like Heat, where they're doing all this weird surveillance and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And I never really saw. I'm sure that happens in the big cities, and I'm sure that it happens, and we probably don't catch those people. But a majority of the crimes are not premeditated. I have had some murders where it was just straight premeditated. Like they were set up to kill that person, and they went and they killed that person, and like that was their motivation. And that's first degree murder, which is a bad murder. But yeah, so it does happen, but you're right. It's not as prevalent as people think. It's very spontaneous.
Yeah. Similar to domestic violence, two people wake up, are having breakfast, having a good day. And throughout the day, somebody starts drinking, drugs gets involved, anger happens. Next thing you know, X is beating the crap out of Y, know, and it wasn't planned, but it just, that's the path that it went down. So I know there's a difference, like you said, between just somebody that committed a violent crime and then somebody who premeditated, i.e., a serial killer or something like that. Would you say the same characteristics is the same for a serial burglar as it is a serial killer? Is it about power and themselves and control, or are the thought processes completely different?
That's a great question. Because I've seen a little bit of both. I would say about maybe a little over half of residential burglaries are basically just people who need drugs and know they can break into your house, steal simple stuff, and trade it for drugs. But then there are actual burglary crews out there, and they will do they will do some surveillance. So that's a great question, because you're right. They will actually go around and they'll drive the neighborhoods. They'll see who's not home. When do people leave for work? Who has this house is monitored by some kind of agency outside of their place. They'll actually put the work in, and they're not going to steal a whole bunch of stuff, but they're still stealing stuff, usually again for drugs. But yeah, that definitely is a little bit more of a planning structure that goes in there. I don't know if it's necessarily about the power, and I've never had a repeat burglary person tell me that it was something they really enjoyed. It was more of something that was easy to do, because more than likely the persons aren't going to be home. So it's really kind of a low threat environment. Like you break into someone's home and you don't expect anybody to be there. Whereas when you rob somebody, you know someone's going to be there. You know that you're using force. Most burglaries, they don't have weapons, because they don't need them. Their weapons might be like a pry bar or a screwdriver. They're not really planning a confrontation. Whereas a robber, they have a weapon or a simulated weapon, and they're planning confrontation. Like that's the whole point of it, is you have to intimidate that other person to give to because it's not, hey, please give me your wallet. No, you have to intimidate that person to the point where they give you the wallet. So they have to be very dominant and forceful. Whereas a burglar is more of the sly kind of, I'm going to break in when you're not there, kind of almost like a passive type crime. Right. That's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is very interesting, to say the least, the mind of how a criminal thinks. Growing up, when I realized that I was slow and not fast, and the NFL wasn't coming my way, I thought about becoming a criminal psychologist, and I took a couple psychologist course, only to find out that you have to be smart to do that, and that part didn't work out too well for me, because there's a lot of vocabulary, a lot of Latin, so I ended up going into the military, and that's where my career took me. And now I'm retired and podcast full time and work a nonprofit and love it. That's awesome. But it's a long path away from criminal psychology. But I've always been fascinated with the mindset and the thought process more than the act itself. Yeah, I don't find anything interesting about killing a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or just a woman that you can dominate for whatever reason. That act itself never really interested me, but the thought process of what makes you think that you should do this, or the desire, as people say, that makes them do that. What are you seeing during these interviews, as far as not necessarily a serial killer, but just somebody that had committed the murder and got caught? It really kind of varies. I've always said that my interview style was always very non-confrontational. I would basically just have a conversation with you, but I would always bring facts. And that's usually how I got most people to either confess or just lawyer up. Like I would say, I'm going to keep going until you confess, or you say, I want a lawyer. Where you ask them, hey, what about this? And they're like, oh, I was at my girlfriend's house. Like, well, yeah, but you weren't, because, and then you show them video. I can bring my laptop in and be like, hey, see this video? That looks a lot like you. Same, and sometimes same shirt you're wearing right now. Okay, so I wasn't at my girlfriend's house. I was there in the video, but then I went to my girlfriend's house. Like, well, then you actually got a speeding ticket. There's a ticket. Remember that? Okay, and then and then you kind of go along. Or finally, they're like, okay, look, okay, dude, you got me. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, I just want you to tell me the truth. And they're like, okay, I did it. But there's some people who just really, no matter how much you have, they're like, didn't do it. Well, that's not me. That's not going to be me. I've even showed people DNA reports where we've gotten their DNA. And in this particular case I'm talking about, I actually got DNA on a firearm that was proved to have been used in the murder.
his DNA was not only on the outside of the gun and the trigger of the gun, but also on the magazine of the gun and on the inside of the gun, like where you take it apart. So he hadn't just touched, so he didn't just pick this gun up. He had obviously taken it apart and cleaned it at some point.
Yeah.
His DNA was all over that gun, and you explain it. And he goes, can I see the report? I said, sure. So I gave him the DNA report. And it says on the bottom, there's a disclaimer. And the disclaimer says that the DNA has been matched, but there is a probability of 1 in 2.5 trillion that it could not be this person. So he says, 1 in 2.3 trillion? I'll go to court with those odds. I'm like, but you don't realize there's not that many people in the world. Like, there's only like 1 billion people in the world. He's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. But it still says right here that you guys could be wrong. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just, say I want a lawyer. I don't want to talk anymore. I think you're trying to pin this on me. Well, and obviously it didn't work out very well for him. So you have a lot of them. A lot of people really think they're smarter than you, and they really try to convince you that they didn't do it. And they just try to go and go and go. And then you have the exact opposite, where you have some people who just, when you catch them, they're kind of quiet, they're kind of shy, but you start throwing out facts. You start saying, this is what I know. This is why you're here. And they just like, yeah, you got me. Let me just break it down for you. I wanted to kill him, and I wanted to kill him. And there was one, it was a 16-year-old who killed his mom because she cut off his World of Warcraft account because he was getting bad grades. And I'll never forget watching that interview where he was like, and it's like, how did you feel after you killed your mom? And just stone cold leans back and just relief. I just felt relief. Like, it's just, and you're like, what is going on? Like, it's so weird. Just like you said, the psychology of it. There's some people who just, and then on that relief topic, there's some people that they just want to get it off their chest. And they'll even say, I have been thinking about this for, the 2 weeks it took you to catch me. Every night I see that person's face. Every night I hear that person scream. I just want it to stop. And like, you just say, well, if you want, you can tell me about it. Yeah, I do want to. And they'll tell you the whole thing. And just like, man, I feel so much better. And they're like, am I in trouble? Like, yeah, you're being booked for first degree murder, robbery, whatever. And they're like, oh, but you can tell that murder. And I always say we try to, as cops and detectives, even as society, we always try to rationalize murder, right? So a murder or a robbery happened and we go, oh, well, the logical thing is then to go over here and get rid of the gun and do this and go do that. You have to always remember, murder and violent crime is not logical or reasonable. So you can't apply reason to it. And you start talking to these people and you say, you could have literally driven 2 hours to Mexico, but instead you drove 2 hours to California where you got caught. Why? And they're literally like, I was so nervous. I thought I was going to Mexico until I hit the California border and Highway Patrol had stop me, because we had his license plate. And we basically told, everybody and their brother, hey, this license plate, if you see it, stop it, because it's a murder suspect. He was so worked up. He thought he was going to Mexico and he was actually going to California. And he's like, and I'm like, you had 2 hours? And I'm like, the whole 2 hours you told me that you didn't figure that out. He's like, no. I was like, I was stressed. He's like, man, I was so stressed. Like, I was a million things going through my mind. I didn't know what to do. He threw his phone away because he was smart and he got rid of his phone. So he had no phone. So he was basically just directing off of his memory, but it didn't go well for him. So so you always have those where they try to convince you they didn't do it. And then you have the ones that just feel good about it. And then the ones who just are like, yeah, I did it. And it felt good after the whole thing was done. So it's the whole gamut.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense for the ones that are feeling the regret, and I would also imagine that a lot of those types of killings fall into that category where it was an opportunity, there was some anger, an opportunity took place, and it just happened. Yeah. And that's where the regret happens, because afterwards, then they have time to calm down and think about what they just did. Yep. And the fear and everything else comes into play at that point. So those makes sense to me. And like you said, you can't apply reason to some of these more heinous crimes and guys that are just doing it for the addiction or whatever. Yeah. I guess in a way for serial killers, I guess you could relate it to somebody who's a avid hunter that just loves the stock and tracking and trying to outsmart and find its prey.
Yeah.
So I guess you could relate it that way, but any other way, I don't know how you'd make it make sense. So let me ask this: your next level, you end up going into the teaching side of this, which is where some textbooks that you wrote, as well as your new book, On Call, was wrote. How was that transition to go from being the focus and your identity of a guy that is successful in law enforcement into the teaching side?
Yeah. So when I was active in the police department, I still taught, and I love teaching. I taught like history of law enforcement, criminal justice administration to the recruits. I also taught some homicide classes to the recruits and also new detectives. I also taught crime scene investigation to new detectives. So I really liked the teaching aspect. And right before I retired, I actually got a call from a friend of mine from the Secret Service. And he was working as a subject matter expert on some textbooks, and they wanted a local police officer to give some subject matter expert material for 2 new textbooks that were coming out that they actually use in criminal justice classes now. So I just basically, I made PowerPoints for him, and then I offered some real life scenarios. And it was an interesting paradigm because I went from working in active policing to the academia of police, where they would say, and this is the instance I always had where we had, it was a whole group thing. It was like 6 of us in there. We were basically brainstorming ideas about a scenario where a Terry stop, and Terry stop is where a police officer can stop a citizen on the street, right? Police officers can pull up to you and stop you at any time and say, hey, can I see some ID? And you have the right to say no. In law enforcement, there are certain criteria that you look for, and you don't have to have all of them. You just have to have some of them. And so they asked for a scenario. So I gave a real life scenario. I'm like, you're graveyard shift, you're a patrol officer, and you're working in an area that has drug activity. It's 2:00 in the morning. 2 people meet by a bush. They do their quick little hands together. We call that a hand to hand. One walks away, the other one stays there, and then you see like a cherry red light from that person in the bush. And in the police world, that is plenty enough to do a consensual Terry stop. It's a known drug area. You see the hand-to-hand, which is indicative of a drug activity. It's 2:00 in the morning. Most people are not out at 2:00 in the morning. And then you see that cherry red light. So in my training and experience, that could be somebody getting drugs and then lighting that drugs up and smoking it. And I'm saying this as an active 22-year police officer. And there's academia people who say, no, that's illegal. That's an illegal stop. You can't do that. And it's like, well, but that happens every day. Like that is a real life scenario of cops stopping. That's illegal. Like, people are in jail for that. So then you have to compromise. You're like, okay, well then let's add a couple more things, where basically there's a sign that says or a shirt, I'm a drug dealer, and I'm a drug user. So it is weird seeing the application of the law versus the academia of the law. And there really are 2 different things. And that's what led me to my book. So I was thinking, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of detectives, a lot of true crime people out there that just think that you get from A to Z and they're missing that whole center part. And just like you said, sometimes the process is the fun. Like that's where the good stuff really happens. The best part of the burger is not the bun, it's the meat on the inside. So
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people don't take into consideration either. You listen to all these true crime investigations, it's a single crime. Yeah. Again, all these things that we're talking about right now are just compiled with another case and another case and another case, especially in the robbery and burglary side, So the real life scenario is probably similar to being deployed in the military. It's hours of boredom with a few minutes of excitement. And that's really the way it goes. And I think investigating a case is probably really similar to that. It's a lot of behind the scenes, legwork that finally builds up to some excitement when somebody's getting caught and captured.
Yes, absolutely.
So let me ask you this then. There's a fine line, the military itself, and that's all I can relate to, because that's all I did. Your ROE and your procedures is a fine line between by the book and staying alive, and I would imagine, there's been a lot of controversy with the police department as far as, states that have the stop, frisk, and search. Is that good? Is that bad? Is that racist? Not racist? Whatever. However, not doing it increases the likelihood that a officer has now got a higher chance of being injured or killed because of a weapon he wasn't aware of at the beginning. What is your thoughts when you're dealing with a student that is very academic? It's by the book and what you're doing is illegal and I'll never do that. Would you say that, that kind of mentality also opens up the higher risk for mistakes?
Yes. And you're right. It is there's that huge fine line, and every situation is different, because you also, the rules for policing are not as defined as, just like you said in the military with your, it can say, okay, you can't shoot unless you're shot at. Okay. Right. But what if you're shot at in like there's a lot of it. We could all think of a million scenarios that kind of fall in that area, but kind of don't, where you and me in the same situation, I would say, oh, we're being shot at. And you could say, we're not being shot at. Well, what do we do then? Do we just, rock, paper, scissors it and see what happens? It's the same thing with police work. There's many a times on cases where I would be like, hey, I think there's probable cause to go arrest this guy. And there's someone else, my partner or someone else I'm working with, who goes, I'm just not there yet. And sometimes the opposite, where I was just a more, someone else is like, yeah, no, we're going to go and we're going to break that door in and arrest him for that. And I'm like, hold on, dude. Like, I don't know if let's get a little bit more, I want a little bit more to feed myself. So there is that big disparity between the two. And it really is dependent. I hate to say like the lawyer answer, but it depends on each scenario. Yeah. Each scenario has its thing. But as law enforcement, we are trained now to think like that. And I always found that too. Having been through multiple trials and seeing how defense attorneys will treat a case and even treat me on the stand, that helped me every single time. And I've always said, people can badmouth defense attorneys all they want. They are our greatest learning tool, because I have been hammered on the stand for things and I learned. And then the next time around, in another case, I made sure that I took care of that thing. And everybody's like, why are you doing that? I said, because I got hammered on the stand and now I did it, and they can't say that I did it. They'll find something else to pick on you about. They always will. Right. But it makes you smart. So if you can think like, and that's how they're trained police officers now. That's why there's so much training on this. That's why police officer training now is a lot more scenario based, even from when I went in, because they want you to be thinking multiple steps ahead. Mistakes are still going to be made. But if you use force on somebody, why did you use force? Who was watching that force? Yep. Is your camera on? What did your camera capture beforehand? That's why you see a lot of the body camera footage where officers, you see them and they're saying all kinds of stuff. You're like, why are you saying things? They're trained to do that. Drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. Like, how many times are you going to say it? They're saying that over and over again. So people, when they watch the camera, know there's a gun. So there's no question that guy had a gun, or that officer at least thought that they had a gun. And then so they go from there. And that's the disparity. And that's the thing that we as society and true crime readers and everybody else, and watch the stuff on the Netflix and all that, we have to really be cognizant of, is we have to remember that everybody has a bias and everybody has a story they want to tell. The cops want to tell a story. The other side wants to tell a story. And then there's somebody in the middle who's trying to make money off of both of them by telling a story. And if you keep in mind their motivations, it's just like interviewing somebody who may be lying to you. Why are they lying to you? And I think if we all kind of take a step back and just realize that everybody kind of has the same interest in heart, and that is that, keeping people safe, we're just going about it in a different way. Yep. But that's the best way I can describe that. But it's always going to be force, and policing is always going to be questionable, just like in the military scenario. Military force and military conflict is always going to be questionable. I mean, we do force, and then 10 years later we go, man, we shouldn't have done that. Yeah, but at the time, but at the time we all wanted to do it. And then, anybody could wait 10 years and go, yeah, we should have done that. Yeah. And again, I think a lot of it is, it's a lot easier when you're standing in a
a place with your Starbucks coffee, try and put your moral compass on a scenario that happened. It's a lot different when you're sitting in the sandbox or inside a building searching for a criminal that's hiding, and he's got weapons and he's capable.
Yep.
It is a lot different. But you brought up a really good point, and the fact that at the end of the day, you do these scenario type trainings. The military does it over and over. I mean, all the way down to putting on our gas mask. We did it so many times that your brain no longer tells you it's going through these motions. It just goes through them. It knows the steps, and those scenario-based trainings is going to give the officers a much better decision-making process when the scenario training has became muscle memory.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly to this day. So I have been retired for 4 years, but I've been training with firearms since I was 18 years old in the Air Force. And we did a little bit there, but not that much. But Secret Service is when it really starts. And I was actually just shooting with my son just like a week ago. And I still, when I reload, so we were at an indoor shooting range, and when I shot, and when I reload, I said loading. And he's like, Dad, why do I do that? It's been ingrained in me since the age of about 25 years old that when you exchange a magazine, you say loading. So my partner next to me knows I'm loading. Cover me. I'm loading. I didn't plan to say it. I didn't mean to say it. It just happened, because you're absolutely right. Once it's ingrained in you, that's just how it is. And that's how, a lot of, especially with the firearms and the use of force type things, you're just used to that, and your body just goes to it naturally. You don't know why you do it, but that's good, because in a stressful, heated moment, that you're only going to operate about 50%. So you're going to go right back to muscle memory. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're really going to not know what you're doing.
Yeah. It has to become instinct. Your natural instincts is what's going to keep you alive in these types of scenarios. And if your training isn't based on something that can relate into your instincts and make it part of your instincts, taking a dog that barks all the time and getting it to learn to only bark at a threat and to decipher the differences between threats. Those all become, scenarios that you have to continuously work and train and make it muscle memory. And then it becomes part of your instincts, I want to ask this other question before we get into your book. What about resiliency training? What is it that the law enforcement are doing to help, the officers with their mental health? Again, when you see murder after murder after murder, these are all traumas that become embedded into your mind. You don't think of murdering somebody, but when you see a scenario, you see something, you get those flashbacks from it. And those are all hard things to deal with, because you guys are just like us in the military. You're not broken, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. And it has led to the problem that we have now with our mental health. Is there any new things that they're trying in the law enforcement agencies to combat this?
Yes. And it kind of happened after I left, because you're absolutely right. I noticed, so I was actually, when I was a patrol officer, I was actually on the peer support team. So that if someone was involved in a critical incident, like a child drowning, an officer involved shooting, I was trained in critical incident response, where I would come out, I'd help them out, just basically just there to listen to them, get them pizza. I would say, get them pizza and listen to them. I'd just be there, just sometimes we talk about baseball, but we're just be there for that person. But once I started doing violent crimes and started being a detective, I couldn't do it anymore, because it's a conflict of interest. I may be investigating them for shooting somebody, and you can't be their peer support. But Mesa did a good job at the peer support, but not always in the homicide world. I noticed, so my 8 years in homicide, I noticed that I was being trained in the signs of PTSD. Towards the end, I was seeing the beginning signs of PTSD. It wasn't increased alcohol consumption for me. It wasn't lack of sleep. For me, it was emotion. I would see a commercial and I would just start crying. I don't know why. I would just start crying, because, and just like you said, in the homicide world, if you live, we don't deal with it. So there was never a day where we had a victim that lived. It's always death. It's always misery. And the worst were, when I have the nightmares, it's telling the mom that her child is dead and having her scream and cry and just fall on you. That is the worst. And you got to compose yourself. You got to hold yourself together, both for them, because you can't break down. You got to be the rock at that moment for them and say, hey, I don't know how you feel, but I'm going to find the person who did this to your loved one. You can't be the weeping with them. You go home and you weep. You know what I mean? You go with, we would go with our peers, and that's when we would, let our guard down a little bit. But now, so it wasn't a whole lot when I was there, and I'm glad I left when I did, because when I did, I noticed that I still have little tiny signs of it, but it got better pretty quick. About 6 months out of it, I started getting better pretty quick. But now in the Mesa Police Department, they really started focusing on that. And in not just the psychological part, because you're in the military, so if you say, hey, everybody's going to get, every 6 months, you're going to go see a psychiatrist and tell them about your problem. What are you going to sit there and tell them? Everything's fine.
Nothing.
Yeah. What's on your mind? Nothing. I'm good. You know what I mean? Even if you're not good. And what are you going to say? Yeah, I see dead people. I hear parents screaming because that's what I deal with every day. And they're going to go, okay, well, how are you dealing with it? That's my job. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't not do it, So they actually started going to a thing now where they're actually kind of giving a reprieve from people and making them get out of these high stress units. So they're doing it for homicide, sex crimes, and also the people who deal with the child pornography type cases, where they're saying every 6 months for 3 weeks, you're going to the academy, and you're basically going to be a physical a PT instructor, where you're basically going to run. You're going to run with the recruits. You're going to go with the recruits, and you're going to, keep their physical activity up. When they do the obstacle course, you're going to run it with them. You're going to be out there and basically be like their motivation. Like, look, I'm a 20-year cop, and I'm still running this thing. So come on, get your butt up there and let's move this. Let's run this. And I think that's really smart, because it gets you out of that paradigm for a while. It gets us working physical activity, and it gets us back to the roots. I always found that when I would be in the homicide, and you'd spend, months and months and months, like you said, behind the desk. And then they would say, hey, we need everybody to put a uniform on because we're going to have a marathon, or we're going to have a presidential detail comes into town. So we're all in uniform, or we're all directing traffic. A lot of us complained about it because you get out of your routine. You're like, oh, I got to find my uniform. But it was kind of exciting because you'd put that uniform and that vest on, and your badge and your duty belt and your gun, and you were in a patrol car again, and you'd kind of be like, this is what we were here to do. Like, this is why we came here. It's good for about 24 hours, and then you're done. You're like, I need to go back and put my suit on and sit at my desk and be a homicide detective again. But it was kind of nice to get back to your roots. Yeah. And I think that that's really smart, is what they're doing. And from the people that I talk to that are still in the department, they love it. They're like, it's 3 weeks. I get great activity. I sleep well for 3 weeks. I'm not on call. I'm not getting called by a bunch of people. And the department has their back, where they're basically like, look, there's no trial in that time. We got your back. You gotta schedule it when it's good for you. But your 3 weeks, you're just PT instructing and taking care of yourself, kind of thing. And if there's no PT that day, then they're basically like, hey, go work out and find something to do. So, and that's great for them, because they're like, yeah, you come back recharged, and you're like, you know what? I thought about things. I got some good ideas. Let's hit it running. And you're able to kind of get you to that next break. So I think that's really smart. So these agencies are learning. They're learning. You can't just push people 1,000 miles an hour, because they will break. Yeah.
Yeah. The way the military did it, it was just unfortunate. And none of us really thought of it at the time that we were doing damage, but you would see the psychiatrist when you got off the plane, right? And so your family's now standing there waiting for you to get done doing your quick in processing and everything else, so you can go home with them. And they would hand out these flyers that you filled out. Do you think about suicide? Do you see dead people? Do blah 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 blah. Do you wish to be alone? Do you have hatred? All these types of scenarios. And if you mark yes to any of them, well, then you had to wait to actually see the psychiatrist. Your family still had to wait for you to get done. Oh, and by the way, the psychiatrist doesn't start seeing people until after everybody's done with their flyers. So now you're behind the scenes, and nobody's gonna say that. I just want to go home and be left alone.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm working on a project to really hopefully make a difference and get some better training done for our troops. But let's dive into your book. I know when I wrote a book, it was challenging as hell. Even though I was writing about myself, it was still hard. Did you have any struggles when you started putting your book in?
Yeah. So, and what really, I got the idea of, I remember it was like 2:00 in the morning and we were standing in the middle of a bloody crime scene and we were all tired and sad and we're like, this sucks. And I'm like, you know what? There are so many people in this world that would want to be where we are right now to see what we're doing. Because, sometimes when you have an exciting job, you forget just how exciting it is because it's very mundane for you. Yeah. I'm like, there's so many people out there that really, really are interested in this. And my wife watches all the true crime, series and shows. And I'm always like, they skipped something. Like they went from A to like, oh, a murder happened. And then we went to John's house, knocked on his door. I'm like, you need to come with us, John. And we interviewed him for 50 hours and he didn't confess, but we charged him. I'm like, okay, they're not telling you they're not telling you what really happened. Cause there's no way that they prosecuted this dude because he didn't say anything. You know what I mean? Just because he lived next door. So I was like, kind of like we were talking about, like the behind the scenes kind of thing. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind. And then I retired. And then I was literally retired for like 3 days when I started because I just couldn't find, people just kept calling me like, hey, why don't we do this? Hey, we need subject matter experts for your book. You interested? Sure. That's when I really saw, when I saw the disconnect between actual policing and the academia, I was like, you know what? Not just for true crime readers, but also for the upcoming detectives. Because going in the detective world, there are schools for detecting, but nothing for homicide. Like there's no special training that I got to be a homicide detective. It was just working cases, working on homicides. And then I actually had a case that was an aggravated assault. It's the first chapter of my book. It was an aggravated assault that just turned into a homicide. And as I briefed the homicide unit on everything that I had done, they were like, that was amazing. You're a homicide detective. And I'm like, well, I don't think I'm ready. And like, what are you talking about? You just did it. You know what I mean? And I kind of had mentors that told me, hey, you always think you're not good enough and you didn't do it, but you just did it. You just proved that you could do it. And then I tested into the unit and then started from there. So I also wanted to give some examples of the cases I worked where I learned from my mistakes and where I learned from my successes. And that's where, as the professional detectives, that's where you learn the most. Right. So just like the military, I imagine, like you have like Ranger school, but then there's probably people who've been Rangers forever who know things that just because you pass Ranger school doesn't mean you know. And it's the same thing in any career out there. We always look to the older people. We always pick on them too. Because like, oh, it's the old timers. They don't know how to do things. They can learn from us, but we can learn from them. And that's how I wanted to have. Is I wanted to have a book that true crime readers could look at it and say, oh, wow, there's more into that case. Let me research it and see what they're missing and come to my own conclusions. And also for people who are interested in getting into the detective world that maybe are law enforcement or patrol officers, maybe want to get into the detecting world or homicides, they can learn from my experiences outside of their own department. Because a lot of times we get compartmentalized where I was only learning from people in Mesa Police Department, where there was really not, you had to like watch TV or read other people's books to learn from people from like Chicago. Where there's times I read a book about a Chicago PD homicide detective, and he did some investigative techniques. And I'm like, I read it in a book. Let's give it a shot, and it worked. You know what I mean? So if I can help a little person like that, and also just give a little bit of insight to it, and that's what I try to do with the book.
Yeah, I think that's the era that we're really in. A lot of people don't understand how important it is to document their life stories. These are all things that are part of your life story. And in 30 years, we have no clue what's going to be taught. Who would have ever thought we'd be renaming army bases or military bases and tearing down statues and just rewriting history like we can go back with an eraser and change it. And that's one of my motivations with this show is I have no idea what the textbooks are going to teach our kids of 30 years from now about our war. Were we still heroes or were we really just people that were attacking other countries for no reason? And that, theory is still out there, but at least I'm telling my story and people can hear it. They'll find it on the internet, whatever that looks like in 30 years, and I wish back when George Washington and all those the founding fathers and everything was out there signing things. I wish there was podcasts back then that we could have watched and understood what they were doing and getting that same information that we're building for somebody ahead. what you're writing now is going to change how investigations are done in the future. And that's the true legacy behind what you're doing. So my hat's off to you, Justin, man. That's awesome. I'm going to give you the opportunity to come forward and tell everybody where they can find the book and where they can get it and follow you and learn everything else that you're doing.
Awesome. So you can get the book on Amazon. It's on call Justin Bocock. If you just Amazon search on call Justin Bocock. It's also found at geniusbookpublishing.com. That's the publisher, geniusbookpublishing.com. If all of that is a lot, I have a website, and that is www.justinbocock.com. And there's links on there for the books. My book on both the Amazon and Genius Book Publishing. There's also, I have a blog on there. There's also have links to all my social medias. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, any social media you can think of. I'm trying to get out there, Instagram, and also Substack. I also have a Substack where I kind of write little blogs about current police examples. I give some examples of my own. Recently, I wrote about what it's like to be in a riot. I was in a riot when I was in the Secret Service. So I kind of give you some firsthand knowledge of what that really feels like and how it's kind of stressful. So yeah, best place is www.justinbocock.com, and there's links to everything there.
All right. And we'll make sure that we get all of your links and ats and everything in the description. When this video airs, it'll be pasted all over the screen along with pictures of your book and everything else. We'll make sure that the readers and the followers out there can follow and find you guys pretty easy. I appreciate you coming on, Justin, and I hope everybody out there got a little bit out of this, a little bit of the behind the scenes and a better understanding of how hard this job really is compared to what you see on TV. And, if all of these steps was put into a show, one murder would be longer than probably the longest movie out there. And so it skips a lot of things and it gives you a lot of false, but obviously, people like Justin, you can pick up their books and learn if you're truly interested in what these heroes do. I think picking up their book and following them is the best way. So I hope all of y'all enjoyed the show. Y'all be safe and don't forget, don't let the day kick your ass. Kick the day's ass.